about 11 o'clock here. Welcome to NOAA Live Alaska. This series is a collaborative effort by NOAA Fisheries Alaska Fisheries Science Center, NOAA's Alaska Regional Collaboration Network, and NOAA's National Weather Service. As I said before, my name is Lisa Hiruki-Raring. I work for NOAA Fisheries, and this is the first webinar in a series that we designed to help you get to know NOAA's work in Alaska and how we connect and work with your communities. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, studies the ocean and the atmosphere and where the two meet, from the weather to the ocean to the animals that live around us. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA or work in partnership with NOAA. Today, we're introducing you to Kim Goetz from NOAA Fisheries Alaska Fisheries Science Center in Seattle, Washington, who's stepping in for our original speaker, Paul Wade, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. While we'll be talking about NOAA's role in research and stewardship, we want to recognize that we're all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. We acknowledge that Paul and Kim's work is done in Cook Inlet, which is the traditional lands and waters of the Dena'ina, who have stewarded their lands and waters for thousands of years. We would also like to acknowledge that we're hosting this webinar from the traditional lands of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. A few guidelines before I hand you over to our speaker. You're all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure that everyone can hear our speaker. However, there's a box where you can write questions. It might be on a menu to the right side of your screen or the top. It depends on your device. We encourage you to ask them as we go, and I'll be keeping track of questions for Kim. She'll stop every now and again and answer a few questions. We'll get to as many as we can, but we probably won't be able to get to all of your questions. So enough talking, I'll hand it over to Kim to introduce herself.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Hopefully everybody can see me and hear me okay. So my name is Kim Goetz, and I'm gonna just tell you a little bit about myself. I was asked to provide you some information of how I became a marine biologist. So I grew up in Colorado with my brother, as you can see by the embarrassing picture there on the right. My family raised German Shepherds, so you can see that I was more than excited to hang out with the puppies each day. And despite me looking ready for the beach, I have no idea why I'm actually wearing a swimsuit. I actually didn't see the ocean until I was about 8 years old. Instead, my view looked a bit something like this. We went on a family vacation to San Diego, and that was the first time I saw the ocean, and the first time I saw a marine mammal or a whale was at SeaWorld. And so at that point, I knew I couldn't go out of state for college to get a marine biology degree like I really wanted to, because I needed to stay in state because the tuition was too high out of state. So I got a biology degree at an in-state school, and I ended up spending my first part of my career working as an entomologist, which is studying insects and spiders. And while I liked this a lot, during my last year of college, I took a marine biology class to study coral reef ecology in Mexico. And when I saw how beautiful it was under the ocean, and just seeing how animals interacted with their environment, I decided I need to go back to school to get a degree that required me to live by the ocean so that I had an excuse to get out of Colorado. So many years later, and here I am, and happy to tell you any more details you might want to know about that later. So I'm going to talk to you today about 4 different topics, and this is a little bit roadmap of where we're going. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is, what is a beluga? What makes a beluga whale a beluga whale? And then I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about monitoring and how we monitor animals, both by boat and by plane. And then I'm going to talk to you about using drone data, so how we use the data that we collect. And finally, I'm going to talk to you about acoustics and how we use sound to study these animals. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first topic, and after every topic, I will stop and I'll give you a chance to ask me any questions that you might have. All right, so here is a picture of a beluga next to a narwhal, which is the animal on the top. They're closely related species. The narwhal is well known for its long tusk, which is actually a tooth that comes out of its forehead, which seems a bit inconvenient. And then they're both toothed whales, so they use the teeth to capture their prey, and such as fish. And they both have this melon, which is this fatty mass that's on their forehead that you can see right over here. And this actually moves around, and they can use that to find food and to navigate through their environment, which is called echolocation. And I'll talk a little bit about that more on the last topic I covered. So belugas are, they can get up to 18 feet long, and they weigh about 3,500 pounds. And just for reference for you, that's about half the size of the length of a school bus. So you can fit 2 whales to give you the total length of the school bus. All right, so baby belugas are about 4.5 feet to 4.5 feet when they're born, and that's about the average height of a 10 or 11-year-old. And even though they're called the white whale, you can see that they're white as adults, but they're actually gray when they're first born. And so here's my props here. So here's an adult white whale, and you can see it has the blowhole where it uses to breathe. And then when they're a teenager, they're a little bit lighter, so they're a gray, or sorry, like a gray color, light gray. And then when they're born, they're a dark gray color, just like you see on that slide. So just to show you how big they get compared to the average adult, that's an adult right there. And they're born after about 470 days inside mom. So mom is pregnant for about 470 days. And just for reference, a human baby is about 280 days. So that's almost double the amount of time that the female, the mama beluga, is pregnant. They're born in late July or early August. That's the peak birthing period. And so in Alaska, there are 5 populations of beluga whales. So there's the 2 here up in the North Slope, so in the eastern Beaufort Sea and the eastern Chukchi Sea. And then we have a population here in Norton Sound, which is called the Eastern Bering Sea. And we have a Bristol Bay population down here. And then we have Cook Inlet, and Cook Inlet is the population that we're going to talk about. These guys live their entire lives in this area. They don't leave, and they stretch from down here where Homer is, down in the south, up to Anchorage in south central Alaska. So the population used to be about 1,300 animals in the late 70s or so, and today they number about 300, a little bit less than 300 animals today, which makes them a very endangered population. And they're not recovering, so we're trying to study why they're not recovering and what we can do to hopefully save this species. So even though Anchorage, or Alaska, sorry, is just often thought of a remote area, the whales live next to a big city of Anchorage. So as of 2019, nearly 40% of Alaska's population lived in this area. And because they're next to a big city, we worry about what harm we might be doing to these animals. So like noise that we might be introducing from ships and construction of the ports and pollution that can go into the water. So because there are a lot less animals now, and the population has declined, its range has gotten actually a lot smaller. So they're most commonly in Upper Cook Inlet, especially in the summer, usually within about 30 miles or so of Anchorage. So I'm going to show you these 3 red areas here. So this is the first one up here in Kincaid Arm. And this is, so these are where belugas commonly hang out. And then this is the tidal flats of the Susitna River Delta. So it includes Little Sioux River and the Susitna River and Beluga River. That's a very common area for them to hang out, as well as Chickaloon Bay. This is another very popular area. So you can see that if an animal starts in Kinnick and it wants to go into Turnagain Arm, it's going to have to travel down here past Anchorage and then go up this area on Seward Highway all the way up to Girdwood, and it passes Bird Point. And so those of you that are familiar with the area, during high tide, when the water is covering these gray or these tan mudflats, you can commonly see the belugas, especially in August and September. So that's a really good area if you want to go and see them. I want to take just a second to talk about these mudflats. So this map, you can see all these kind of tan areas here. And these mudflats are a very interesting feature of the environment that belugas use in this area. They they drain out, so all these mud flats are exposed at low tide, and animals, the belugas, want to get up into these mud flats because they can trap prey going into rivers, so salmon. And so at low tide, they'll kind of hang out right at the edge of this mud flat, and they'll wait till the water gets deep enough, and then they'll go onto the mud flats. But these areas cause, they can be quite dangerous. And every year in the newspaper, there's various headlines that say, somebody got stuck in the mud. People try to walk to Fire Island on low tide, which is this island over here. And it's a very interesting type of mud, almost like quicksand. So you can easily get stuck in it. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So what do belugas in Cook Inlet eat? Well, we know that they eat salmon and a fish called eulachon or hooligan, and that's a small fish. It's like a herring or a sardine in the summer. And then in winter, we actually don't know a lot about what they eat. We know they're not eating a lot. And so we think they feed a ton during the summer. They just feed and feed and feed. And then they eat enough so that when they don't have as much food in the winter, they can still get through the winter and be okay. And so this is you can see that this picture on the right here, this is a bunch of fishermen that are fishing for salmon on Ship Creek. And so this is, humans are also interested in the same food that belugas eat. So baby beluga in the deep blue sea, we all know that, that phrase from the song. And so one of the things I wanted to point out is that this isn't so relevant for Cook Inlet and belugas. Certainly in other populations of belugas, the water is nice and clear. But in Cook Inlet, this is what we see, a lot of mud. And so we like to compare this to marshmallows and chocolate milk, which is a little bit more descriptive of them. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to take questions on this section before I go ahead and dive into the next section.
So, Kim, this is Lisa. And Cindy was curious about your thought that orcas are killing belugas. She asked, are they defenseless, or do they have any defenses?
So that is a concern. Killer whales are their main predator. They don't usually go up on the mud flats, and they don't necessarily come into it's not common that we see them in upper Cook Inlet. When the animals do go south, though, let's say like ice freezes in and they have to go further south, then it is more of a concern, and they don't really have much of a defense. So it'd be a good target for a killer whale.
Thanks. And Naomi wanted to know if they live in cold or warm water.
A great question. It's cold water, so this is pretty much Arctic water. So it could be slightly warmer in Cook Inlet per se, because it's a protected inlet, but in general, it's cold water species.
Great. And then let's see. So Miss Etcher's class wanted to know, how do whales sleep?
Great question. We know that beluga whales, like dolphins, do something similar where they're not like you or I. They shut down half their brain at one time, and they sort of rest, if you will. And so there's only been a couple studies that have been done on animals that are in SeaWorld or captivity. And so they think they just rest half of their brain at one time.
Great. And then so we had a couple of questions. Actually, you had said that belugas are closely related to narwhals, and so we had a couple of questions on narwhals. One was, are the narwhal and the beluga the same? Are they endangered or protected? And then LaShawn had asked whether narwhals are experiencing the same population issues as beluga.
All good questions. I am not a narwhal expert, unfortunately. That is not one of the species that we work on at our center. I do believe that they're all protected as marine mammals. I'm not entirely sure how the population is doing, but I believe it's also in decline, but I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look up.
And then finally, Anne-Marie was asking, do whales blink?
Do whales blink? That is a great question. I don't know if I can answer that, to be honest. I don't think I've ever seen a whale blink, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
It's a curious question for all of
Yeah,
us, I
I'm like,
think.
I've never actually thought about that. So that's a great question.
And then Martha had a question about how do the belugas get up to the river through the mud flats? And so you might get into that in your next section, but maybe we'll finish with that question before we move on.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about that in another section, but essentially there are little channels in the mud flats that they can use to get up to these areas.
All right, well, let's get on to the next section because I know that you have a lot of different interesting things to cover.
Okay, great. So I'm just gonna chug along here. Okay, so we're gonna get into the second section, which is just talking about how we monitor the animals. So one way that we do this is we use planes to conduct aerial surveys. So we monitor the animals by plane every couple years, and that lets us count how many animals there are and see if the population is going up or down. Our survey duration ranges between 4 and 9 days, and the surveys are all conducted in June and July. So basically we go out there, we count the animals, and we also video the animals. And we do that because, as you can see, the babies are dark and they're small, so we want to make sure that we can go back and look at the video to see if we missed any animals for our count. So the other way that we do this as of a couple years ago is we started doing boat-based surveys. So we conduct research by boat, and we use a drone to take photographs of the animals. But because of the extreme tidal cycle, there are no floating docks in Anchorage. So that means the dock doesn't go up and down with the water level because it's a 30-foot tide that changes every 6 hours. So as a result, we have to launch the boat every day from Ship Creek Boat Ramp, which is just below downtown Anchorage, past the train station. And we launch during high tide. So I'm going to show you a picture here what this looks like. So this is high tide. This is when we can put the boat in the water. And we have to stay out all through until the next high tide because this is what it looks like at low tide. We cannot come back in because there is no water. And when I say this is an extreme tidal cycle, I just want to show you what that kind of looks like. It's something called a bore tide, and there's few places in the world where this happens, where instead of the water just gradually lowering and rising, it's actually a big wave that comes in at one time, or each time the tide changes. And you even get surfers that ride this all the way up. So it's not for the lighthearted, but it can be done. So we go out when days when it looks like this, or at least we try to the best to our ability, because it is a dangerous environment. So it's just an example of what we're dealing with when we want to go find the animals. As the tide goes out, it gets very shallow in the mud flats, and some of them go completely dry, as I've shown you there, the figure over here. And so the figure on the right, this picture is what it's showing. It's basically the fish finder or the sonar of the boat, and you can see that it says 5.6 feet, and this blob right here, that's a beluga that's going below our boat. So that beluga is in 4 feet of water, and it doesn't seem to mind because they're completely used to it. But to get to the question that was asked, these belugas are quite smart, and they use these really narrow channels to navigate through these shallow areas. And sometimes we think we're more clever than the whales, and we think we can take a shortcut to get to the whales, and when they're using the channels, and we end up like this. So we have to be careful. We still get stuck when the tide goes out. And on this particular day, the whales, were going one direction down the channel, and we went a different way. And it makes sense that they're smarter than us, right? So this is their home. They navigate in the shallow sea and the following tides every single day for their entire lives. So score one for belugas on this day for sure. Okay, so this is just a picture showing that we collect photographs. We do all this basically so that we can take photographs of the whales. And the picture on the left just shows you us taking pictures of the sides of the animals from the boat. At the same time, we're also collecting pictures from overhead from the drone. So the drone is just an unmanned aircraft, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the next section. So before I get to the next section, I'm going to show you a video just to kind of get you thinking about what this process looks like. What are we doing out there? So I'm going to be patient for 1 sec, and I'm going to start this video for you. Okay, let's see. That's over here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here we are launching the boat from Ship Creek, and we're running west towards Fire Island. It's going to be west of the airport. And you see Anchorage there in the background. So we have to put in batteries each time that we operate these drones because they're very battery intensive.
Yeah, one.
So that's what our coworker here is doing. And they work as a team. So there's 2 different people. There's 2 pilots. The one actually flies the drone, and the other one is looking at the video to see where the whales are and giving direction on where to fly the drone.
Never saw one on
So you'll see when this starts up that we kind of joke that it sounds like a hive of angry bees. There we go. And the whales are usually about 100 yards, which is about a football field away or so. But sometimes they get really close to the boat. And there's lots of gray whales and calves.
There's a calf. Neutral. Okay.
And this is us bringing the drone back in, and this can be quite difficult because the boat is moving, and if it's rough seas or if it's windy, this can be very challenging. But you can see here that these guys are pros. Okay, I'm going to go back here to the presentation. Let's see. It's here, and okay. And okay, that's it for this section. So I'm going to pause it once again, and I'm going to see if anybody has any questions about that.
That was good timing, Kim. So we have a couple of questions actually about the boat work. Let's see. So one of the students in Miss Sager's class wanted to know what the red stuff in the water was when they were launching the boat. And I'm guessing that might be mud, but I wanted to check with you about that.
Yeah, that's correct. That's just, I'm not sure exactly if there was something particular in the mud, but it's just the mud that's in Cook Inlet kind of has a reddish color.
And then the other question about boats that Sarah asked was, does the boat scare the belugas?
So when we get near belugas, we generally either are going very, very slow, or we actually just kind of turn off the engine and just drift. So in general, we try to stay as far back as we can so that, or we have like I said, we're just drifting. So we disturb the animals as little as possible. Certainly we've seen boats that drive through and do disturb them, but we generally don't see too much.
Great. So that would actually, one of the other students had asked whether belugas ever bumped the boat to check it out, but I'm guessing that from your answer, they probably stay away from the boat and you guys try not to get too close to them.
We have all sorts of experiences. So sometimes they do come near the boat, especially the young animals. They might come near the boat and check it out and they like to blow bubbles a lot. So they'll do these, you'll see these bubbles coming up. So they do get curious.
Now, first grader Acacia wants to know what would happen if a beluga was in warm water. Would it sink? Would it overheat?
Well, it's a great question. And in fact, very good timing. We had, I don't know if you've seen the news, but there was a beluga that was seen in San Diego a few months ago, and it was just recently found actually died in Mexico. So it wouldn't be an ideal environment. Suppose, you know, if they could find the prey that they need, they could potentially do okay. But I don't know if the temperature itself would cause it to overheat. It's a really good question. I don't think it necessarily overheat. I think it would just need to find the right kind of food.
Well, and then a related question, which probably goes back to your first section, was that one of the students was asking, how do whales not get cold in the cold water?
Yeah, so they have a very, very thick blubber layer. You know, it can be inches thick. So they don't get cold. They're just fine. You know, it's just like thinking of a polar bear that has all its fur. These animals have very, very thick blubber. So they put on a nice thick layer to keep warm.
Great. Okay, and we have a couple of different, so there's a drone question and a couple of number questions. So the drone question is that Homestead from Ms. Humphill's class wanted to know, how do you become a drone person for NOAA?
So we have pretty strict training requirements. And so one of the requirements is not just a NOAA requirement, but just in general, is you have to get a pilot's license for that. And so we have to go through the same type of license training that anybody else would have to. And then we have to do a lot of practice flights. So we have to practice with other people that have already the certification so that we get practice on the same instrument. And yeah.
Great. And then Sheila in Old Harbor wanted to know how many belugas are all together by Anchorage. And then Katya also wanted to know, how do you not count the same whales twice?
All very good questions. So in total in the population, there's just less than 300 animals, and we generally don't see them necessarily all 300 or at one time. We generally can see, you know, one group of 100 animals maybe, and then a group of 20 or a couple here and there. So we generally, as far as counting them twice, usually we do the survey all at low tide. We do the entire upper inlet in one kind of circuit, and so we find a group and we circle that group and we get one count on it. So when we're flying, we look straight out the window and we start counting, and we only count straight down. So we're not counting animals that are surfacing twice or animals that are ahead. So we try to do the best that we can, and then we correct for animals that are underwater.
Great. Okay, well, maybe we can go on to the next section and then take some questions after that.
Okay. Great, so I will go ahead and jump into the third section. Okay, so this is, again, it's a picture of our drone. It's a hexacopter, so hexa means 6, so it has 6 engines. And since the drone has a video camera, it's basically a flying camera, the drone itself, and then it has a video camera so the pilots can see what's underneath the drone. And it has an instrument to measure the distance above water, so how high the drone is flying. And this allows us to assess the population, identify individuals, and estimate age. So here we are, we're looking for baby belugas. And you might ask, well, how do we know if that is a newborn? We take a lot of photos of whales, and when we're back on land, we carefully go through the photos and we look for mother-calf pairs, such as the ones you see here. So baby whales usually swim right next to the mother because it's easier to swim for them, and they, you know, the mother provides protection. And we can tell this is a newborn calf because it still has, let me see here, these little creases that you see that are pointed by these arrows, and these are called something called fetal folds. And so when the baby's inside the mom, it's not just stretched out like this, it's actually folded up. So these are the creases, kind of like, you know, when you iron something and you see the creases, this is where the animal was folded up inside the mom. So we know that that is a really newborn calf because that goes away as the animal gets older. So here we go, we have a newborn calf on the left and we have a 1-year-old calf on the right. So how do we know that this is a newborn? That's you know, a 1-year-old. As I said, you know, you can see the fetal folds, but also we look at the length. So here we actually measure the distance between the blowhole, so where the animal breathes, and where this ridge starts on the back. And so we can't actually measure the total length of the animal because we can't see the top of the head, and we can't see the tail of the animal, but we can measure that. And there is a correlation, or a similarity you can assess what the total length of the animal is based on this, or the age of the animal. So here, this is a 50 to 70 centimeters, which is about 3 pencil lengths from the blowhole to that ridge. And the 1-year-old is much bigger. So you can see that that's 70 to 90 centimeters. So that's how we can look at the age. Okay, let's see. So we can also use the drone images for photo identification. So we can recognize when we see an animal again and again from year to year, for example, because they have these scars or these markings. They're permanent on the animal. And so we can even match between that, like I showed you, we're taking photos from the boat and we're also taking it overhead from the drone. So you can see these same scratches appear in both photos. So we know that we're seeing the same animal. So we get an idea of how often, or which individuals we're seeing how often. And this is a really cool slide because this really shows you how different the coloration can be for belugas. It shows the whole progression from being a newborn baby at the top to being an adult white whale at the bottom. And we have colleagues in Canada that work on the Gulf of St. Lawrence belugas, and they've come up with the 7 color scale system that we can use to categorize the whales. And it gives us some indication or some information about how old each whale is. They don't turn fully white until they're maybe about 15 or 20 years old, and they stay white for a long time because these animals can live 50 years or even more. So again, I'm going to stop here briefly and just see if you have any questions about our drone data, and then I will conclude with some acoustics information.
Great. Well, we had a question from Anne-Marie about whether you tag any whales.
We tagged animals in the past, and we've gotten a little bit of data. But to tag belugas, it's really, really tricky because it can be pretty invasive because they don't have an easy way to attach the tag. And we're working, it's a pretty endangered animal, so we're really careful about what we do. So we have been trying to get a suction cup tag on the animals just to get a little bit more information. But we were going to try that this year, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to do field work.
Yeah, that's understandable. So Ms. Sager asked, where do the marks on the newborns come from?
So we don't entirely know. And one of the things that's interesting is that when there are marks on the newborns, they go through like a molting process, and so their skin sort of sheds. And so on the newborns, those scars aren't generally permanent. It's only on the white large animals, and those can be from everything from boats to other animals. Various things can make marks on them.
And actually, speaking about babies, Ms. Eicher's class had 3rd grade class wanted to know how you can tell a boy whale from a girl whale.
It's really tricky with these animals, and generally what we'll do is we'll take a skin sample, and we can do an analysis on the samples that we take, and we can tell that way. But just looking at them, there's different ideas that the males might have slightly broader shoulders, but there's nothing that's definite for sure without doing an analysis in a lab.
So if you could see the whole whale, like if it was stranded, you might be able to tell whether it was a male or female, but if you're just looking at the back, you can't. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Let's see. So Catherine was asking, have you noticed if they're the same pod of whales showing up year after year?
Yeah, so we do see the same animals year after year. The pods themselves, so the group of animals that hangs out as a unit, that tends to change. They're not always in the same exact little group. So they can kind of go back and forth, and whether they have bigger family groups and smaller family groups, it tends that they're not always with the same individuals, but we do see individuals year after year.
And then a 1st grader, Oscar, from Mr. Hawk's class wanted to know whether you've crashed any drones into the water.
No, I do not think, I wasn't on this project right when it started, but I'm pretty sure there has been no drone crashing on this project. Not to say no one has ever crashed a drone on a project, but not on this beluga project.
And then Katya wanted to know, can the drone tell what the whale has eaten?
Not really, unless you get, Paul has taken, and Paul was in the, I'll point him out later, but Paul has taken some drone footage where we've seen the animals kind of corralling and making a lot of splashing, and there was definitely some feeding going on at a river mouth, but it was really hard. I don't think you could get a species ID of exactly what it was eating.
And then Pam Potter had wanted to know what would happen if a beluga gets hit by a boat. And then secondarily, she asked whether you know about the beluga that was found at MacArthur River Flats. And I was wondering whether that was, oh, the one that you were talking about before was down in California, so that wasn't the same one.
No, she's talking about a whale out in Cook Inlet. I'm not too familiar with what happened in that particular situation. We do see animals that have ship strikes. You know, it is illegal. So I think, you know, if somebody hit a whale, they would, you know, and it was reported and they caught them, there would, you know, there'd certainly be some law enforcement involved, I'm sure. But yeah, we don't. I don't know about that particular whale in MacArthur, if it was a ship strike or not, or a boat strike.
Okay, and then a couple last questions before we get to the next section. Let's see. We have Ava, who's a second grader in Florida, wanted to know whether whales have brothers and sisters. And Katie wanted to know how many babies do they normally have?
So the whales would have brothers and sisters. They have the belugas can have a baby. I think it's, you know, well, they're 470-day gestation, so how long they're in the mom. So they would, the soonest they could have another calf would be probably about every 2 years or so. So they do have brothers and sisters, but it just, and they have one at a time. So it'd probably be one at the most every year and a half, 2 years or something.
Great. Well, do you want to go to the next section? I know you have a lot of interesting things on that one too.
Yeah, sure. This is a very fun section. We get to listen to some of the animals. Okay, so I am going to talk a little bit about acoustics, which is just a really fancy word for sound. And so we want to, you know, people often ask, there's a typo there, which apparently I tried to fix a typo and I made it another typo. So it's supposed to say, how do belugas see through the muddy water? And so they can't see through the muddy water, right? So they don't. They use something called echolocation. It's something that bats use as well. So echolocation is a really big word. So I'm going to just take a minute just to talk about what that means. So as scientists, we often take words and we, you know, try to take them apart to figure out what the meaning is. And so, for example, in echolocation, we look at that word and we see, okay, there's location in there. I know what that means. It means, well, where is something, right? So what about echo? And, you know, we've heard an echo before, and a sound that it sounds like something's coming back to us, like the sound is coming back to us. So if we put those two things together, so we know that echo has to do with sound bouncing back and location has to do with where something is, then we know that echolocation means using sound waves bouncing back to tell you how far away something is. So many animals use this. They make sounds that bounce off of things in their environment, and they hear it when it's reflected back to them. And so just like bats can use this echolocation at night to hunt bugs, belugas can find their dinner as well. So that's how they do that. So how do we actually listen to the animals? Well, it's a very complicated process, and we have our colleague here, Manolo, who's sitting down, and he has a team of people that work on this very thing. And they deploy instruments to listen to the animals. And so this here, this whole yellow thing is basically just a fancy housing to hold this instrument that I have here in the circle, which is a device. It's a hydrophone, and hydro means water, and it's a microphone. So it's an underwater microphone, and that is able to listen and record what the animals are doing. So this one is deployed into or put into the water and on a mooring or on a line. And we also do ones where we put it into the rock. And so some of the areas, there's like big rocks that we can drill into, and we can put in this this device here. So again, this is just holds the instrument, and it protects the top of it, the part that's listening to the animal, from rocks and stuff for hitting it. So we place that instrument into the rock. And it does occasionally happen where, such as last year, where that mud again is so fluid and can move around a lot that it actually buried a massive boulder that had one of these instruments. So we're hoping we get it back. We're just gonna say that it's in underwater storage for the moment. So we want to know, why is it that we want to listen to what belugas, like why do we want to know what's going on, right? And so animals and belugas, they use sound to communicate and to locate food, to find each other, to socialize, and many more things, right? But there's another thing that we can do, is we can listen to the environment that they're in, right? So these, like I said, that tide cycle with that big tide going in back and forth, that's really noisy. So we can understand, like, okay, well, what are the normal conditions that belugas have to listen to? But also, what are other noises in their environment? So what about noises from construction or ships and things like that, right? So there's something called, it's a term called masking, which is really important in this field, where if you can imagine, like, you and your buddies hanging out and you guys are having a conversation, and somebody else, another friend of yours, starts playing music really, really loudly, and you can't hear your friend talking anymore, so you start talking louder, and then maybe your friend turns the music up louder and you start talking louder again, and you can see that, you can imagine at some point the music's going to be loud enough where you can't talk loud enough to hear your friend. And so that can be something that we worry about with whales, is if there's too much noise and it's too loud, like what happens if it actually disturbs them finding food or socializing or other things. So these are all things that we want to look at and understand. So this image here is a really, it's a visual image of sound. So it's called a spectrogram. And the redder the color, or the brighter the color, the louder the sound. So I'm gonna play this clip for you. You're gonna hear essentially what you're seeing here. And it's what it sounds like when a beluga eats a fish. So you're gonna hear this loud kind of buzzing sound. And at the end, you're gonna hear a chomp, which is literally the animal consuming the fish, so, or eating the fish. So I'm gonna play that for you so you can hear what that looks like, hear what that sounds like, but also see, I guess. Let's see here. Okay. Here we go. Put this up for you, and play that. Okay, hopefully you all heard that. Let me go back here. Okay. All right, so that was what it sounds like with a beluga eating a fish. Now, well, let's hear some other examples, because really, who doesn't want to listen to belugas, right? So here we go. I'm gonna first play you a clip that is a variety of calls and whistles and buzzes. So it's pretty cool. So let's see here. I'm gonna play this for you. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna just go ahead and play you one more clip that's of belugas honking, and then I'll talk a little bit about that. So hang on a sec. Okay, here's the other clip.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Okay, so that's, let's put that back over here. Okay, so that you can see these animals are very vocal, and they are actually nicknamed the sea canary, which you can understand why. If you're standing on shore, you can actually hear the belugas without having a recorder underwater. And the honking sounds are really interesting for me, at least, because I've never heard these until we were on the boat and we're really close to the animals. And it's a bit bizarre because we often hear this when the tide is coming in and it's kind of just before there's enough water where the belugas can get onto the mudflats. And it's usually a big white whale at some point just starts making this honking noise, and then they all kind of take off and go into the mudflats. And it's almost like, hey guys, there's enough water, let's go. And it's bizarre. Pure speculation. We have actually no idea what the sound is for, but that's often when we hear it. Okay, so that is all I have for this last section. So I am happy to take any more questions from you.
Great. Well, thank you, Kim. Those vocalizations were really interesting to hear. I have a couple of different questions about the whales' babies. So Texas has wanted to say, how long do the babies stay with their moms?
I'm pretty sure it's about a couple, I want to say around a couple years at least. Is pretty typical. I have a couple years in my head. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm pretty sure it's around then. And they're in family pods, so I mean, it's not to say they wouldn't be seeing each other often. There's, it's a small area, so it's but I think they actually stay very close for a couple years.
And that actually is a related question. So a student in Miss Potter's class was saying, when babies are born, do they swim right away?
Yeah, so they do. Often when any whale or marine mammal is born, particularly whales, as soon as they're born, the mom will often help them to the surface and keep them at the surface to help them breathe. But they instantly know how to swim. Yeah.
And then Ms. Lichtenstein wanted to know, did you notice a difference in whale behavior due to COVID and less human shipping and activity?
Yeah,
for this past year?
It's a great question. And in fact, that was a real challenge because the acoustic instruments that are recording the sound, they need to be replaced. They fill up with memory, and they need to be replaced, and the batteries need to replace. So that was something that needed to happen this year to keep the instruments in the water for that exact reason. We wanted to know what's going on when it's a quieter environment. And so we were luckily able to work with some local people up there from ADF&G who were able to deploy the instruments or put out the instruments with new batteries. And so we, take a while because we need to collect the data and get it back and analyze that. But that is something we're looking into.
Great. So we had a couple of questions about that buzzing and chomping sound. Mm-hmm. So from Facebook, we have a comment from Barbara that was it the maw sound that you were just talking? Oh, she was talking about the sound that I think that sounded like the sheep, or the baaing sound and the honking sound. Mm-hmm. And then Amanda had wanted to say, said, why do the whales sound like they're buzzing when they eat fish?
So what you're hearing when you hear that buzzing is actually that echolocation. So you'll kind of notice that buzzing gets much faster because they're sending out a sound and then they have to wait for that sound to come back. So as you're getting closer, there's not as much distance for that sound to travel. So you'll hear it speeding up. So the clicks will be much faster. So we know that it's finding a fish and it's echolocating on it, and as it gets closer, that sound is coming back to it faster. So that's how we know. And then we hear the chomp at the end.
So Katya was asking, does the fish hear the whale making sounds?
probably wouldn't necessarily hear, but I'm sure it could. Fish have a sensory organ on the side, and so they can probably feel if something is moving near it. But I don't know about actually hearing the whale, but they would probably feel it.
Okay, and then Beth had asked, what is the biggest animal that belugas hunt?
Ooh, well, I would have to say, I think at least for Cook Inlet, it's probably a salmon or a king salmon. So they often consume their fish whole, and so we have found animals that have washed up that have really big, complete whole salmon in them. So yeah.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So we had a couple questions about migration. One of the questions from Patricia was, why don't they migrate? And then Asher had wanted to know, are the habitats and the migration patterns of belugas affected by climate change?
So Cook Inlet belugas don't migrate. They're very unique in terms of the other populations because it's very isolated. And if they were to even try to go further north and migrate, they'd have to go all the way around the Aleutian chain, the chain that sticks out of Alaska. So we don't entirely understand why they don't migrate. They probably get the amount of food and everything that they need, and there may be other constraints such as distance from them going other places. As far as climate change, I know not with this particular population necessarily, but with other populations further north in Alaska, there certainly have been changes, in distributions from other aerial surveys that have been done that they think could be related to climate change.
Great. So Catherine had asked whether you can repeat your answer about whether the fish can hear the echolocation. I think her students didn't hear.
Yeah, so I don't think they necessarily actually hear the animal coming, but they would probably feel a vibration. So I don't know whether they can feel the vibration of echolocation, for example, but fish would be able to feel the movement in the water because fish have a sensory organ on their side that it's very sensitive, so they'd be able to probably feel movement.
Great. So we had a couple of questions about diving. How deep can they go and how long can they hold their breath for?
So we we've done a little bit of some studying with beluga diving, and they generally Cook Inlet is pretty shallow, so they're not diving, at the most maybe 50 meters or so, but generally in the areas that they're hanging out, they're really shallow. So, they can be less than 10 feet. So they're not super deep divers. And usually, their dives would only last maybe a couple minutes or so. They don't dive super long or super deep in this particular population, but it's not to say that the others don't dive deeper.
Great. Also, we had a couple of questions about interacting with humans. So Liam has been very persistently asking his question, do belugas like humans? And then there was another question about whether belugas are aggressive towards humans and whether there have ever been any attacks.
Oh, those are tough questions, and I'm not sure we can accurately, whether they have a particular feeling toward us. The only way that we can kind of gauge that is just by watching their behavior. So if they show, avoidance behavior, like they don't want to be bothered if we're on a boat, then we would back off, and we would, but as far as aggression, belugas aren't generally aggressive. I know there's been some cases, I think, with captive animals being released and various, kind of offhand stories, but I don't think they're generally not aggressive animals. They would be, if anything, they would be more scared of us and would want to stay away from us.
Great. Okay. Well, maybe we'll take one or two more questions, and then I know you had something that you had wanted to also talk about. So hold on, let me see whether I can find it. So we had a couple of questions about how long belugas live, and also Anne had wanted to know whether they're related to dolphins because she was excited to find out that beluga sleeping, the way that they sleep is similar to the way that dolphins sleep.
Yeah, so if you look at the taxonomy and how all the marine mammals are related, everything, you know, so belugas and dolphins, they're all called delphinids, which is the family that dolphins fit in, and so they're toothed whales, and so belugas are toothed whales, just like a dolphin is a toothed whale. So there is a relationship there, and there are a lot of similarities. And what was the other question?
Let's see, I lost my other question because that was one about dolphins, and there was one, oh, how long do they live?
Oh, so they can, you know, as far as what we know they can at least live up to 50 years and probably more. I don't think we know for certain. I mean, we're always finding out new information, just like, you know, they found out with bowhead whales can live over, you know, a couple hundred years. But as far as we know they can live, I think, at least 50. And I'm not too sure if we know the exact max age.
Okay, thanks. And then our final question will be from Homestead in Miss Hemphill's class, and Homestead wanted to know how many years of college you have to take to be in NOAA.
Well, you know, we have a lot of different people with all sorts of different backgrounds. You know, so we have people with, you know, some people with bachelor's degrees, we have people with master's degrees, and we have people with PhDs. So it just depends on, you know, who's hiring and what they're looking for. I would say generally in this field, a master's is sort of the minimum you'd probably look for these days. So I would say probably at least a master's at this point.
But I think also if you were interested in working on one of the NOAA ships, you might be able to get a job as a crew member with just a high school diploma and
absolutely.
maritime. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are people that certainly there's all sorts of different career tracks at NOAA, and so there's, you know, all sorts of different opportunities for different levels.
Great. Okay, well, I know you had one last slide that you wanted to talk about, so I'll let you go on to that one.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to thank everybody. You know, thank you for listening. And I had to step in basically kind of at the last second. But Paul, you know, I know Paul wishes he was here. So thank you for listening. And also, I just wanted to point out that it really takes a village to save the Cook Inlet beluga whale. You know, as I mentioned, there's less than 300 animals left. They are an endangered animal, and collaboration is key. Like, we can't do this alone. Like, it's not just us at NOAA. We work with people, other agencies, Alaska Native partners, NGOs, independent contractors, you name it. And it's really important in the community. You know, we have belugas count, and so you know, this can't happen alone. It's not just, you know, the few scientists at NOAA that are doing this, but I just wanted to point that out, that working with everybody is really key to try to make sure that these animals continue to exist.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. And thank you to everybody who tuned in to our webinar. We really appreciate you coming. And we also wanted to let you know that we'll be putting up educational resources on our NOAA Live Alaska website that have to do with belugas. And there's also some citizen science programs where you could, if you saw belugas, you could write into the program to say that you'd seen them at a certain time, and that will be collected and incorporated into our database. And I also wanted to give a shout out for next week's webinar. We have Erin Fidowa and Leah Zacher from our Kodiak lab talking about crabs next Tuesday at 11 o'clock. And also we have another NOAA Live webinar series that's run out of Woods Hole Sea Grant, and they have a webinar on Wednesdays at noon Alaska time. And tomorrow they'll be talking about weather balloons. So please tune in and search on NOAA Live on Google, and you'll be able to find those listings. So thank you again. Thank you, Kim, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Thank you.